What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. We are live on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Facebook. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we're going to be covering episode 19 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, Augustine and Aquinas.
Aquinas. So last week talked about Gnosticism and Gnosis and the dangers of radical transformations. So the most present dangers, or the ones we talked about most, were parasitic processing, and that's, your learned behavioral responses to stimuli, usually negative stimuli, leading you back to the point at which you were before and constantly tunneling down. And then the academic term bullshit, salience without truth. And the word gnosis, we can look at, or I have it framed out as you have a higher state of consciousness wrapped inside a ritual framing, wrapped inside a supportive community. And if any part of that goes wrong, then things go a bit awry.
True.
Because you can look back to the 60s and 70s, the hippie revolution, where we had a lot of cults that stemmed out of using old knowledge, but maybe the type of higher stage of consciousness were a little off, or maybe the ritual was a little off, or maybe the community was just out there, So it's important to have all three, your experience, the ritual, and the community all in sync, more than just set and setting, because the ritual helps also frame in what is the intent within it as well.
Yes. So we came up with gnosis as a way of understanding and being, and it became an axial revolution within the axial revolution that was occurring. All these guys that the early Gnostics were Christians, and they saw the point of Gnosticism as to be as one with God, and they endeavored to become like Jesus. They saw him as the way.
And this is a natural, I would say, a natural outgrowth of the need for something when you are experiencing profound domicide. When everything's crumbling around you, your home is no longer home anymore. What do? Well, you have to create a system to help attune you to the way the world is, opposed to the way you would have it. That going all the way back to the lower world and the higher world. Even though that was, a flawed concept in and of itself, it still helps. The way I think of it is, there's the world we exist in, and that we're perfectly happy with just being in, and just having the things within it and doing the thing. And then there's the world that it actually is. And we can experience that profound feeling by just going out in nature and going, oh my goodness, wow, yeah, I've turned off my phone for the day, and I feel so much better. Or I got out of the city, or I decided to take a weekend off from working, or and then you start to get
start to feel centered and grounded here again.
Almost transformative.
For sure, yeah. I went and sat down by the creek today, actually. It was beautiful.
It was, beautiful day.
So there was three aspects to gnosis you were mentioning before we actually went live here. Yeah. The altered states of consciousness, or higher states of consciousness. The ritual framing,
which wraps the higher state of consciousness, and you achieve the higher stage of consciousness through this ritual play, if you will, to get that ritual helps get you there.
Yeah, so these are psychological frames, existential modes of being that we can take on that are ritualized. And then you need a supportive community. Yeah. You need the relevant skills, and then a wisdom community to capacity to overcome one's own BS and self-deception.
Yeah, and instructional. I think that's that word. I don't think Vervaeke used that word, but I substituted it. But instructional, as in it's okay, what did I just go through? What does that mean? Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about it. Let's give you instructions on the next step as you're gaining meaning in the next step.
Right.
Because you just went off into outer space. You need some instruction
He did
and what to
bring
do
up
with it.
you need feedback, you need guidance, you need encouragement. So there's a lot to that social network, that supportive community.
Yes.
And why are we inducing altered states of consciousness at all? Well, the argument here is that there's a significant chance of allowing one to reframe reality in a more organized way that's more accurate to what's actually happening around you. That's more healthy for this one's psychology and physiology as well. But there is the danger of parasitic processing, BS, and self-deception. That's another reason why we induce these altered states to reframe.
Mm-hmm.
So Gnostic theology has the mythological scaffolding, and then joined into that, it gets enmeshed with Neoplatonism.
Yeah.
And we learned this in our previous episode on Plotinus and Neoplatonism. It was part 18 of the series.
Yeah. So there's this idea that we're introduced to that is the demiurge. Mm-hmm. And the demiurge becomes aware of the shapes in the universe and space and time, and sets them in a way which mimics the cosmos or the celestial world. Mm-hmm. So that the concept as above, so below, like in the Hermetic teachings, I forget what the word for it is, but that it'd be about there. It's like this world is framed and shaped by a demiurge to mimic the actual celestial world. Mm-hmm. And you could take it from Plato's perspective, where this is a beneficent demiurge, or you can go into what some Gnostics did, where it's, what's the one thing in common that all the gods of all the peoples had in common? Well, there were prison guards, gatekeepers. You were subservient to them. Everything you did was for them. Mm-hmm. It was a servant or slave relationship with your God, and they chose to try to figure out a way to rise above that to the God of all gods, the God above gods, this God of light, the higher God.
Yes, they believe there's a divine spark that will carry us to that God of all gods. And this was this orientation towards Old Testament God versus New Testament God that is occurring here. This Old Testament idea of God was something that's very authoritarian, can be very genocidal, mass floods if you don't please it, favoritism of certain favorites,
chosen peoples, depending on what the God is. You have different chosen peoples.
It's admittedly self-admittedly jealous and vengeful. And then we get this New Testament idea of God, this God of agape, of light and of love, the God beyond all gods that wants us to reciprocate with one another, and it's more egalitarian. It's inviting women into worship as well.
The unpersons is personing the unpersons, the women, the cripples, the children, the slave, the ne'er-do-well that people are done with and can't deal with anymore. But making people orphans, persons out of
making persons out of people that weren't
considered persons.
Before.
Yes. And so the Gnostics believe that we have the power to transcend this old demiurgic God and move into the state of God beyond gods, and that God of light. The message was brought to us by a messenger that is called Jesus. And it's more about the teachings of Jesus and not the individual that was Jesus.
It's less about believing that he sacrificed himself literally and all these things literally happened. It's more about following the way that he lived.
And Vervaeke discussed the reasoning behind, the Gospels and other books in the Bible not necessarily being a super coherent canon. It wasn't having a super coherent canon that was the important part. It was the participation in making these Gospels, these writings, and making it. It's the participation of making it, which was the important part, not necessarily, well, if you like nerdy stuff like me, I watch Star Trek. I care about canon. Don't you mess with my canon unless it's an alternate timeline, but we're not going to talk about the Kelvin timeline. But anyway, so it's less about like the rule sets that make everything. It's participating in it. It's about writing the poems and the songs as you go in it. A very live, you could almost say like improv experience.
Yeah, embodying the virtue that Christ represented is seen as a way to free us from suffering. So
Through
this is a process of enacting anagage, higher states of consciousness. Um, the Gnostics do want to spread this message,
sure.
so there's this Platonic impression there. They reinterpret Jesus as the way, not just the sacrifice in which we have faith. Yes. So the ways of thinking and being that exacerbate our suffering, the inertia of these existential traps, is what this mode, this approach, this orientation to life is allowing for us.
Yeah.
And we see this explicated in films like The Matrix.
Well, it's creating a mythology without the dogma, and we've done this in modern times with things like The Matrix or The Truman Show, or where it's the myth, and the myth is helping tell a story that it's an analogy for, like, the story is an analogy for the actual meaning. And when you're talking about certain aspects of certain types of meaning, it's hard to actually put words to them, so you tell a story.
See, we
You
tell
create the myth
stories.
behind it, so you can kind of put yourself into Neo's shoes.
Humans have
and
been
wake
thinking
up
in stories for probably hundreds of thousands of years, as long as we've been able to make language to some degree and
I'm sure
act out our
even
hunts.
just acting it out,
Yeah,
you
just
know,
acting
is,
it out. That's been going on
yeah.
for a long time. So we have this story, Matrix, trapped in a false world, just like Plato's allegory of the cave. And there's these agents that are trying to keep us from true freedom. In the Truman Show, the true man, Truman is held back by this overlord that wants to keep him from his true agency, from his true love, and so he has to find a way to get the knowledge, essentially, and that's what you see in the Truman Show.
Yeah. And it's the idea that there's a system that keeps you from being a true man.
So this
like
idea,
a
this
grand
way of
conspiracy
thinking, is so
theory.
deeply ingrained in our culture around the world now. This is how we think as human beings. We think about that self-improvement. We think about how far along are you in life as important things. This is all part of this philosophy that has been so deeply embedded in Western culture, and certainly a lot into Eastern culture as well. And so these myths are pointing us to those perennial patterns, those ongoing patterns that are pervasive. That's the symbolic representations of our suffering and how to overcome it is that axial revolution.
Yeah, and Vervaeke gave a good example of the dark side of that conspiracy theory, demiurgic control of everything. So the way he broke it up is there's an evil overlord. Well, that's the old god. Who worship the old gods? The Jews. And those were the Nazis who blamed the Jews for that. So it's a twisted Gnostic response to the being post Weimar Republic and dealing with World War I, and then being like, you know, at that time in Germany, like, you know, their German dollar or whatever it's called.
So it's like a dark use of the Force, because Gnosis could be seen as the Force.
Well, Star Wars.
Vervaeke brings up the Star Wars metaphor here too, talking about the dark side. That's really powerful, that the way you just pointed that out there. That helped me see what Vervaeke really meant there with the Star Wars metaphor even more. Yeah. And
so what I have written down for what he said after this is we should be ambivalent to Gnosticism.
Yes.
And we should try to salvage Gnosis, like the ritualistic aspect, the framing of Gnosis from Gnosticism. Because
the process of enacting agage, or higher states of consciousness, in order in a communal fellowship type of fashion, with the checks and balances in there to keep ourselves from being taken over by our own self-deception and whatnot. That is a very beautiful, and that's pervades modern Christianity and many other spiritual traditions. This is something that is at the core of how we think of the world and fair treatment as Americans.
And so he brought up some Gnostics that weren't the Nazis. One of them, Tillich, who's definitely not a Nazi. They did not like him. He was interested in the rediscovery of the being I guess the being mode of the God beyond the God of theism.
Yes.
And then there was Jung, who you could think of him as like, a psychological medical practitioner that used Gnosticism in his ideas. He was a psychologist and he looked at the world that way. So maybe, trying to help in that way. And then we had Corbin, who was trying to recover these traditions of Gnostic knowing and like getting that back.
Yes.
Because by the time these guys came around, Gnosticism was already very old.
Yes. Yeah, because the belief, the realization now is we must discover sacredness in a way that saves us.
Yes.
So, yeah, Pageau, Carl Jung, or Jung, bring up this positive side of Gnosticism that we see in our psychotherapy nowadays. To this day, this inactive anagoge, this inactive transformation that you help people through in therapeutic settings, that is the idea of gnosis in a nutshell, what you're doing there. Discovering sacredness in a way that saves us. So I love Vervaeke's advice here, to return real quickly. We wish to explicate or salvage gnosis from Gnosticism, and agape, that unconditional love, from Christianity, and the wisdom from the ancient order. And so that's what we see Tillich, Jung, and Corbin doing here, helping us with now. Because we can get trapped into these historical patterns.
Sure.
We can get stuck in another dark age very quickly.
We're very close.
We're on the verge of one of those moments right now in history.
Which is very exciting, but oh boy, I'm tired. So
So Corbin stands out as like the first German academic to be, what was it? Basically shut down by the Nazis.
I think that was Tillich.
Or was that Tillich?
That was Tillich.
That was
yeah.
Tillich. Okay.
If I have it right, he was university, and the university wouldn't play along, so they removed him of his credentials.
That's right.
Which didn't Canada do that to somebody who was like that too?
Yes, I think they did recently. His name,
some Peterson guy. I don't know.
Rhymes with
Corbin.
Corbin, yeah, Corbin. I was going to say.
Yeah, well, what is it? What's the saying? History doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes.
It rhymes. It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. So we go on to Neoplatonism, and in Neoplatonism, the one is at the core, and not the singular, but the whole, structural functional organization, the one, all parts acting together in this one thing, not the singular, like, you're the singular one, I'm singular. No, it's everything that makes up
the totality.
Yeah.
It's non-dualism.
Yeah. And so Aristotle, he brought some people up from previous episodes. Aristotle had the conformity theory, as in you conform to things and you have different levels that you move up into.
He really liked descriptions, didn't he?
Yeah,
and things to be defined.
And as you move up through these livable, viable levels and conform more to the world, it helps us remember the being mode more. And the Stoics were concerned with overcoming modal confusion, which helps us in the being mode more, instead of confusing the having with the being. And ultimately that helps us know what is actually real, like the structural functional organization of what is real.
This is what brings us to Plotinus and his grand unified field theory to integrate the spiritual systems. So he takes the anagoge from Plato, the knowing from Aristotle, and the overcoming modal confusion, how to be in the being mode more, from the Stoics.
And ultimately it's to become more real and experience more real.
Yeah.
And you can't have that. You can only be that. You can't have more real. Right. You can only be more real.
Yeah. So Plotinus integrates Christianity with Gnosticism and Neoplatonism, along with spiritual exercises one can perform in this mode. We know by being. We have levels of being, and pure potential to pure actuality, levels of realness. Yeah. As we come to know these realities, we conform to them.
Yeah.
We make them more livable. We change reality in ourselves. As we change reality in ourselves, we're leveling up the self and it's becoming more capable of living in that higher reality, and it gets into this reciprocal looping that's just continually upgrading itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this helps us to remember the being mode. What makes something real? What makes something feel salient to us?
And not even just like a quick, oh, well, this is what makes it real. No, what are all the components together, and how do they function, and what is their function as well? Like the chair can be a table if you use it as a table. But it can also be a stool if you use it as a stool.
How deeply do we know that oneness of the disparate parts?
Yeah, and that's the oneness. It's
and
all
that gains
the parts.
Us realness. That's what gains us realness, because things become more integrated together. And as we become more integrated, more actualized, we become more realized.
And doesn't that make a lot of sense? Like, say like go to a festival and, you're either taking LSD or psilocybin mushrooms, and you get this profound feeling of oneness where you're watching all the things happen and deeply understanding it happening. And then when, I don't know, something happens, like somebody comes by and goes, kind of felt like you're like, yeah, no, that actually makes perfect sense. So yeah, that fits in there perfectly. That's the oneness, the all the little bits and everything, seeing the whole out of all the little disparate bits.
Yeah.
All together, fleeting as it may be. If you're doing mushrooms, it's like 4 hours, and acid is perpetual if you just keep doing it. That's what they figured out, Timothy Leary and all them. They're just like, just keep drinking it. You just keep going. And I'm like, no, I'm lazy. 4 hours is good. I want to go to bed.
I think if one's working with any substance, or even it's a breathing practice or a chanting, it's how attentive are you to that moment that allows, it's even more so than dose that.
Yeah. Because
they can aid us tremendously, but even smaller doses of some of these substances, with the right set and mindset and the right setting, and then perhaps you could say skill or cultivation of meditation, or sense of the present moment, how familiar you are with that present moment, and how comfortable are you at being able to return to that easily and not be pulled around by your thoughts, by your psychology. How much of a master of your mind are you? And all of these come into play, because if you can just be, and you can go into that stillness that becomes increasingly pronounced under the influence of certain plant medicines.
And you'll come in and out of it too, just like with meditation. You come in and out of that.
Yes.
So like ultimately,
the longer you can stay open, the more it magnifies within the moments, and people have experienced the peak experience.
Maybe not the length, but the breadth at which you could open.
The length and the breadth of it can increase exponentially. And so if you're having one of those peak moments where something is really starting to become apparent, but you get a little distracted, then you come back because it's beautiful and you want to see it more and feel it more and understand it more, let go completely.
It actually kind of reminds me of
and trust, and just open your heart with love.
So Saul's story before he became Paul, it wasn't that he was suffering for weeks and months on end to have this epiphany. No, it slammed him on his behind immediately. So like sometimes you can have insanely profound higher states of consciousness in a split second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Usually, like I would have to say, those are probably more of the ones that sneak up on you and get you, where you have those
What always
befalls moments.
Like a grace.
Yeah.
It always befalls like a grace. And you can't make it happen, but you can perhaps make the mind fertile ground for it, fertile for it to occur in. So the more space that you can explore between your thoughts, and the more used you are to returning to that present moment in life in general, the more you can access the deeper spaces of those higher states, I would say. So
that's the end of my notes. So
understanding these processes help us reduce inner conflict, makes more viable the deeper interconnection with reality. Higher states of co-creation can be achieved by humans with this change in our existential mode. You can't have it because you already are it. That's one of the things that's really difficult to grasp about meditation, self-realization, enlightenment, so on and so forth. But one of the best metaphors I ever heard is that when you're trying to meditate, first off, there's no try and there's no do. The idea of the doer that does things is the ego, is the psychological sense or idea of self that we hold in our heads. So what we're doing, instead of, because we're always kind of think of this as like we're always trying to grasp and have control over life. But if we can relax the grasping, if we can let go, so it's an undoing rather than a doing, then you can be in that space anytime. And that is the space of meditation that we return to over and again. And you can help focus into it by focusing on your breath, or maybe the sound of that light tinnitus of reality in your ears, whatever it is that's a nice benign focal point. You just
I got permanent tinnitus, bro.
Right?
It's
well,
just
that's a perfectly available
all the time.
benign thing that you can just hold your attention on. The underlying
well, there definitely
noise of
is
reality.
there definitely is a tone, and I do experience this when I'm intentionally going down into dreaming. As you regress back and back and back, eventually this tone, and it's not one tone, it's like a chord harmony of tones. And when I'm doing it, I like to make music in my head, and then you can hear it, but it's this one tone. It's unsingable, unknowable. It's all tones, but all of the harmonic overtones all together, but still just one. It's the one. It's all of them to make the one. Because so if I was to sing like you could call that an A or an F or whatever that might have been. But there's actually, there's an A,
no discernible,
but there's the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth in there, and the major seventh in there, and a major third in there. But they're all at different levels to the main chord one, and that's what we call the timbre or timbre of your voice. Why all voices sound different and all instruments sound different is because the overtone series is slightly different in each things. So the different components of the many create the one
sound itself is a very weird phenomenon.
Very
the fact
odd
that we have vocal boxes and then mouths and tongues to shape the words, and the way that we push air with our diaphragm.
And humans can make crazy noises too, man. I mean,
we've been doing it for a long time for us to be able to actually have a reliable way to sing. Where you're really projecting your voice, but you can do so in a beautiful way to your fellow creatures. That's how long have we been singing, even?
As long as we've been able to go willfully, that's the one thing. Great apes, they don't have the same ability to hold their breath and then release slowly. It's
we're the only ape-like mammal that holds our breath underwater, that knows how to hold its breath. Very few mammals know how to do that. They're like beavers. There's dolphins and whales that are super evolved to the water. They are mammals, but you do have the beavers and things like that.
But if you notice,
there's not many of them. But we're one of them.
When a dog goes diving, it doesn't necessarily hold its breath. It just constantly blows bubbles out of its nose. But even you can throw, don't do this, but you can teach babies how to swim at very, 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 very early ages. And I forget what it's called. It's the mammalian something response that as soon as even if you're an infant and you hit the water, you go and you stop breathing when you go under. You don't inhale.
Right.
It's so ingrained into us.
So it's genetically programmed into us.
No, you can teach infants how to flip themselves over.
Well, also, we talked about this before, the aquatic ape theory. Our fat isn't marbleized through our muscle like beef or other mammals. And it's actually a subcutaneous level of fat right under our skin that's around all of our muscles, so it's an insulation.
Yeah. And it's not aquatic in the sense of we were in the ocean. It's more think about apes in the swamps, up to their chest in water. Which would make sense. They come down to eat this stuff, and you already see greater apes
for a long time.
The greater apes do this. They'll find a spot where they know it's safe enough that doesn't go deep enough, and they'll go out and they'll get but they're very wary because apes don't float.
Yeah, we evolved from something that learned to swim to hunt. Yeah.
And all the best tasting stuff's in the water.
It could be that there was an ice age or something. The only thing that they could eat too was along the coastal areas where they could find fish.
Well, I think it was the swamps,
swamps.
So you get out of the trees, you go in the swamps, which teach you how to stand upright, and then you walk out of the swamps on feet that are like flippers.
Oh, that's really good. Teaches you to stand upright. You get used to standing upright with less pressure and muscle weight when you're in the water.
Baboons, they live in the plains, but they still run on all fours.
Yeah.
Why aren't they standing upright? I think it's because at a period of time in our evolution, we were in swamps most of the time, getting used to standing up straight and walking like this in the water, and getting better and better over the eons.
I can't get enough of ancient documentaries about early hominids. It's so fascinating.
I'm down with the aquatic ape theory. I think that's the most plausible.
I saw the old lady that did her TED talk on it, and it was pretty compelling.
Oh, it
Yeah,
makes a
well, I
lot
mean,
of
the
sense.
subcutaneous fats, the fact that we can hold our breaths, the fact that we don't have fur all over our bodies, and that our feet are like paddles, unlike the rest of the apes.
Well, dude, and there's
Yeah,
people who just live on boats. There's less
we
and
got a
less
little bit
people
of
now,
webbing
but
between all of our digits.
in the Pacific Islands and stuff, and like, the Southeast Asian islands, there's groups of aquatic nomadic people that can hold their breath for like 12 plus minutes easy, and actually their spleens are bigger.
Ah,
So like we've, as humans, developed the abilities to adapt to
so we
like, and
probably
you could
de-evolved
dive
some of that too.
super
Yeah.
low and then come back up. Like we're now at the point right now where like with proper training, pretty much anybody listening to this can hold their breath for 5 minutes easy with
Not that hard,
with not
yeah.
too much training.
Yeah, you do the Wim Hof breathing trainings that I have on this podcast, and you will easily be able to hold your breath over a minute to 2 minutes on your first session.
Yeah, what was her name that was in the
And this is holding your breath out. You're not even holding your breath in when you do Wim Hof.
Yeah. Actually, it's easier to exhale your breath. You can, like, I used to do this. So I'd go to the pool and I'd exhale my breath and sit down, and I could sit longer with oxygenating the blood, opposed to relying on the air that's in your lungs, because you're not absorbing the oxygen unless it's passing your
Yeah, that's what you do with the breathing techniques. You're super oxygenating all of your cells prior
Don't do
to
this
the
by
breath
yourself
holdout.
though.
Yeah.
Like if you're like doing this in a pool, don't do it by yourself, because you can hyperventilate yourself.
can pass out.
So be careful. The
Yeah,
lifeguard.
don't ever do Wim Hof driving.
No,
Don't do that. Don't ever do it while you're operating any kind of heavy machinery. Not a wise move.
no, definitely not.
You will very likely get yourself into an accident. At least smash into a guardrail.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I think that we've caught ourselves up pretty well here. One final note that Vervaeke laid out for us, that in this time of the culmination of the Greek axial age, there was no division between spirit, science, and psychology or psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going to take a nice deep dive into Augustine and Aquinas. This is a really good episode. I'm stoked for this one. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get on over to John Vervaeke's Awakening for the Meaning Crisis, Part 19.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Last time we were talking about this interaction and confluence between nascent Christianity, the transformation that's undergoing the Platonic tradition in Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism. We had ended up by talking about Plotinus and how he brings about this grand unification of the best science of the time, Aristotle, the best therapy of the time, Stoicism, and the best spirituality of the time, Platonism. And this is done all in a way that powerfully integrates mystical experience, achieving higher states of consciousness, and rational argumentation. Things that we now experience as diametrically opposed: science and spirituality, reason and transformation, therapy and realness. All of these things were not, they were instead powerfully mutually supportive. Now, Plotinus is around 270 or so of the Common Era, and after him, of course, the Roman Empire starts to go into decline, and we're seeing the end of the ancient world. And there is a figure there, a towering figure, who basically brings this configuration, this triangle that I've mentioned, of Christianity, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism together. He's deeply influenced by all of them, although he will eventually give priority to Christianity. And that's Augustine. So Augustine is a Roman, and he's alive in the 4th century into the beginnings of the 5th century as the Roman Empire is entering its final stages. So as you can imagine, that impending collapse is bringing with it a very dark vision of the world. And for that reason, Augustine is attracted to Manichaeism. Now, this is a religion that was started by Mani from Persia. And many people argue that it is a Gnostic religion. Some people disagree with applying the term Gnostics to it. Again, it doesn't matter. It seems to have picked up on a lot of the same kinds of ideas about a machinery in which we're enmeshed as creatures of light, and that light has to be liberated by a special kind of gnosis. And Augustine is deeply attracted to this religion. He's attracted to this religion precisely because it is, as I said, it has Gnostic components in it, and therefore promises to address his own personal loss of agency, which I'll talk about momentarily, but also to address what is becoming more and more salient to people of Augustine's time, which is a world that is darkening around them. So he's influenced by that, which means ideas of evil and evil powers and structures in the world are very salient to Augustine. He also deeply suffers, as I mentioned, personally. He is riven with inner conflict. To put it, I think, in terms that would make sense to us today, Augustine is a sex addict. He is deeply addicted to sexual behavior. He described it this way, and I think this is a particularly apt way of describing his addiction. He said, "I was always licking the open sore of lust," which gives you a very telling image of a compelling desire and yet and something disgusting and degrading, and it's also exacerbating and making worse the very affliction that you're suffering. So he suffers tremendous self-loathing because of this, tremendous loss of agency. And he struggles to try and find a way of getting free from his own personal inner conflict and degradation, and also providing an answer to the evil that he sees in the world. He writes the first autobiography in the history of the West, the Confessions, and in there he relates an experience which deeply, deeply affected him. I would say it came close to traumatizing him. So when he was young, he relates this story. He and some of his friends broke into a courtyard and stole some fruit. And you're thinking, most of us would think, yeah, a young adolescent performing, a misdemeanor act of minor theft, stealing some fruit, who cares? But this is Augustine. He's already enmeshed in a Manichaean worldview. He's already deeply he's becoming aware as an adolescent of how powerful his drives can be. And what affected Augustine about this very profoundly is he said he did not want the fruit. He did not desire the fruit. He wasn't really trying to impress his friends. He wasn't desiring that. He came away with a very strong experience. It's almost like a reverse of a higher state of consciousness. He came away with a very strong experience that he stole the fruit simply because it was the wrong thing to do. That he wanted to do this. That was something in him that was dragging him down. And this is, again, why this worldview appealed to him. There's these, it's like, again, Manichaeism is very much like the Star Wars mythology of the light and the dark side. There's a dark side, and it's drawing people down, and it's the side of desire and anger and destruction, right? And Augustine sees this alive within his own body in his sexual addiction. So he travels around the world, he teaches rhetoric, and he becomes eventually connected and familiar with philosophy. And something happens to him that's quite profound. He reads the work of Plotinus. He reads the work of Plotinus. He has a very high opinion of Plotinus. He later writes in Plotinus, Plato lived again. And he writes very glowingly of the Platonists. And in Plato, and especially in Plotinus, Augustine sees a different way. He gets a worldview other than the Manichaean worldview. He gets the Neoplatonic worldview, and he gets it. I mean this in the Gnosis sense. He gets it. Augustine has a mystical experience while reading Plotinus. He has that ascent up to the one. He rises through the levels of reality and levels of his self, and he has this mystical experience, but he can't hold it. He can't stay there. The darkness in him has so much gravity, pulls him back down and pulls him back towards that world of lust and addiction, that reciprocal narrowing that Mark Lewis talks about so powerfully. And he wonders, why is the gravity pulling me? Why is the darkness that pulls me down? Why is it so powerful? Is there anything that can overpower it and pull me up? He says, I get what Plotinus is talking about, but the evil within me, it's too strong. The darkness pulls me down too much. He'll later come to say that this is like a hole in being, and it's just sucking the light away. And so he has what some people have reported having after they have some mystical experiences. He has a rebound effect of despair. It's like if I was to show you a beautiful place, this beautiful beach, and when you stepped onto the beach, you finally felt at peace, like the peace you've sought all your life, and there's beauty around you, and you feel alive and vital, but you can't stay. You can't, somehow you just can't hold, and you're drawn away, and you can't stay there. Now the place you're in, the darkness and the squalor that you're in, is so much worse because you have been in the light and you know you were incapable of staying there. So he's falling into despair, and he's at his mother's house, and his mother is a Christian, Monica. And he's in the backyard, like the courtyard, and he's listening, and he hears a child's voice say, take up and read. And there's a Bible there, or an early version of a Bible, and he picks it up just where it is, and he happens to, of course, read the work of Paul. And in Paul, he finds an affinity, a deep affinity, that kindred spirit. Because in Paul, he sees that same inner conflict, that same tortured inner conflict, and he sees a worldview that makes sense of that inner conflict. And Augustine has this insight. He says, look. Pay attention to Plotinus. Pay attention to Plato. What are they saying? Plato and Plotinus are ultimately saying we're driven by two powerful loves. We're driven by the love of becoming one within and becoming one with what is most real. Just what's driving all of our reason is love. A love for what's true, a love for what's good, a love for what is beautiful. And then he says, at the heart of reason is love. And what's damaged in me is my capacity to love. Not my capacity to reason, That's why I have this sexual addiction. My capacity for love has been thwarted and twisted by my sexuality. So I need something that can heal. Remember the gnosis, the healing. I need to be healed. There's a love that is within reason that can help you grow beyond reason to what reason always sought. How do we grow in love? Well, agape. That's what the Christian message is. Agape, by participating in agape, we grow in love. We grow in the love that is driving us to becoming persons, fully realized persons. So Augustine says, Neoplatonism needs Christianity, and the healing and the response to evil that Gnosticism was looking for can actually be found in Christianity. And so he synthesizes them all together.
Okay, we're gonna break now before we let Vervaeke get carried away.
I just got
further.
Just got a call too, so it messed up my sync. So the triad of Christianity, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism, which Augustine was a participant in, but there's Medicanism,
Medicanism,
the Medicean worldview, which is the evil and the darkness at this period of time. The battle between the light and the dark, and there's this all-consuming darkness.
There is a sense that the world is darkening among the people. It's becoming more and more prescient.
Yeah, what is most salient is this darkening of the world.
And Augustine becomes super salient to that good and evil, this idea of good and evil and inner conflict.
And so his inner conflict was his sex addiction. And I liked this quote, licking the open, I'm always licking the open sore of lust. And I put a little note here, like a dog. Like an animal,
licking the open sore of lust.
Constantly, without thought, just behaving in this self-destructive action.
In a way that makes the affliction even worse. The suffering, the self-loathing, the loss of agency. He wishes to overcome, and so he struggles to get free from this inner conflict. The sense of degradation he's feeling about himself,
and dealing with,
as well as a way to help solve the evil in the world. So he's really seeking some deep answer here. So he writes Confessions, and he tells the story of him stealing the fruit.
And so that's quite enlightening. The reason for him is not because he wanted the fruit or he wanted to impress his friends, but because he knew it was the wrong thing to do.
Just because it was wrong.
Is that not what teenagers do when they're figuring themselves out? Well, particularly obstinate ones, like there's something called obstinate defiant disorder. They're like, no, like, how dare you tell me? No, I'm going to do the opposite because I know it's wrong. Screw you. And if you've ever had friends that, I love my friends that are like that, but oh gosh.
It's like a kid that's like hungry for attention and hasn't been getting it, and so has found some really clever ways.
Yep, or just the screw it all, burn it down. I know this is wrong, but it's something
playing
to
with
do.
evil. Yeah, because that's how it felt to him. Aquinas describes the strong experience that something wanted to bring him to destruction, like something within him just wanted to self-destruct.
It's almost like the duck got a will of its own and wanted to wobble its wheel self
to do it
into
because
pieces.
It's wrong. Yeah.
So
he reads Plotinus.
Yeah, and sees a different way other than the light versus dark, and the dark is this ever-consuming thing.
He says in Plotinus, Plato lives again.
Yep, and he gets it in the sense of like gnosis, get it in the sense of sati, remembering, as in like truly gets it, remembers it, has the being experience of it.
Yes, the ascent to the one, the mystical experience. He can't hold it.
Yeah.
But he can't hold it because he still hasn't overcome his inner demons, essentially. He can't stay true to a level that allows him to stay in this space.
And instead of feeling better about the situation when he comes back down, he feels even worse. It's like, man, why is this darkness so powerful? Why does it pull? And
he goes deeper into despair than ever before, because
he's
known the light and now he's fallen, and it's
I can
worse than ever.
I can empathize with that, because I have my moments of like, yes, this is great, we're finally here, but then, man, falling back down into it and seeing the nasties of the world, and particularly in those that are close to you within your community, and it's just like, man, like, dude, like, what is this evil suction device, demonic suction device?
It's a toxicity, like a miasma that's spreading. Yeah, like an evil cloud, and then people take on the evil themselves. I remember people's rhetoric changing, and across the right and the left, people were throwing terms like snowflake around back and forth, and it just got progressively
or
worse.
Nazi, or
the worst things people can think of.
Okay. Yeah. So, but this, like, I wrote this note as Eden is fleeting, like that perfect state is fleeting, and and when you come back out of the light, the darkness seems even darker. I guess the goal would be is to be able to come back down and not be consumed by the darkness again. It's like realize the fleeting nature of this aha moment, this understanding, this light.
I like that. Eden is fleeting.
So he's at his mom's house, and he picks up the Bible, and when you do that thing where you pick up a book and you just open it to wherever and you read the first line that you see, he had that, and it was Paul.
It was Paul.
And it was a kindred spirit. It was somebody who's like, aha, this guy gets it. Like the
same inner conflict.
Yep.
Yeah. And he comes up with a worldview that makes sense, to help him make sense of it through this. So he recognizes that Plato and Plotinus were both pointing out that there's like two loves that we are driven by: this love within, and this love for what's real, this love for what's true, good, and beautiful in the world is at the heart of all reason.
Yeah.
So love is at the heart of reason,
and it's not your capacity for reason that gives you meaning. It's the heart of reason in and of itself is love. Yeah. And that's what gives the meaning.
It's always centered in love. Isn't that amazing?
And so he's in desperate need of this healing gnosis, this way of understanding and being that's a healing factor, not delving into it and be like, this is great, and then coming back out being like, oh my God, but I'm coming back down to all this, so how do I deal with it? But something that sticks around, and really the only thing that sticks around is the love.
The agape of Christianity is what stands out to him. That really starts to stand out into the forefront for Augustine.
Yeah.
Yeah. The more we participate in the agape, the more we come to know love. The idea that at the heart of all reason is love is really profound. It's like, why do you care about your reasons? Why would you have reasons for anything unless there was not something deep down in there that you love, that you wish to reciprocate with, that you wish to be one with, that you wish to share in co-creation with somehow? Like, you want to engage in something true. You have a reason for that. This is your opinion. It's strongly held. But at the very bottom of it is love, and then are symptoms of the reactions of lack of love, like fear.
Yeah. Well, I've been asked this a lot. It's like, like, DJ, like, why do you care? Why do you keep talking about these things? It pisses people off, and you're not making any friends. You're actually losing friends. Well, the reason behind me doing what I do and becoming so passionate, the reason is love. Because even if I don't like you, I still love you. And I still want to participate in that love that comes before me, that moves through me, that helps create real persons, realized persons. And because the rest of it's just despair, going down into the darkness. If you don't have that, you're going down in the darkness. And I've been there, and it's not a good place to be. It's not productive in any way.
As soon as we're in that place where we're willing to cut off our innate love from whole groups of other beings because they believe in this or they believe in that. I don't know if every single one of those people that are being projected or portrayed to believe a certain way really do. I'm seeing that portrayed a lot. But when I talk to the individuals, they don't seem that way at all. They seem quite the opposite.
Yep.
And so that's a concern when you see that happen.
Well, it comes down to
there is a blanket, like, an innate love. We don't like to see the suffering of others. You know, that's part of how somebody familiarizes themselves with you when they're doing their TED talk or they're telling a story of any kind. When it's humanized and you understand a little bit about their past experience, something problematic they went through, all of a sudden you identify with them more. You start to care about them more.
Yeah.
It's a natural blanket love that you can have for anybody.
Well, and this idea that so love is at the center of reason also makes sense for those who preach and push things that are very unreasonable and destructive. They aren't experiencing love,
No,
and that is tragic.
they're experiencing fear.
Particularly, like, there's certain ideological standpoints that are intentionally unreasonable and intentionally hateful. And it's sad, more than just sad, it's tragic that we get tied into these things, and they feel good in the moment because it's like, yeah, I'm justified in my anger, but
Yeah, and you're
the
on the
light
right
gets
side. You
dimmer
feel
and
like you're on the
dimmer
right
and dimmer
side
and
and that
dimmer.
you're doing what's good. And you're also feeling, yeah, you feel justified. You also feel safe in your group. And also you're going to feel like more accepted maybe by your group. And
Well, it's kind of like
we really lose our sense of self in there.
it's kind of like going from a bright day and now it's getting darker, and then we're just going to go towards the campfire. And yeah, that campfire is bright and you can hang around that campfire, but it doesn't show you
Because you'll
anything.
hear people say things that are clearly
well,
irrational nowadays.
But and the campfire gets dimmer and dimmer
Yeah.
and dimmer, and you'll get closer and closer and closer until finally it burns you out, and then you're lost in the darkness, waiting for the day to come. And then when the day comes, then you see everything for what it is, and you might be terrified for it. It's like there's a reason why people have a breaking point right before they're waking up again, that they're completely irrational. They don't know what's happening in the world. It's quite literally the light has dimmed and the darkness has overtaken and sucking all meaning out. The remedy to that is love as best as you can, but not go find love and love the kittens and the little kids and all. No, like the love that makes persons.
the love of co-creation.
Yeah.
The love that helps bring the humanness out of people.
Yeah.
Instead of dehumanizing one another, we can help humanize one another again. We can see each other as we are in this moment. Find where somebody's heart is. What are their orientations around, their value orientations? Why do they have that kind of reasoning? Why do they think that way? Is it because they're cruel and malicious, or they're this word or that word or whatever? Or is it that they might actually have some kind of reason you may disagree with, but you can see that it's reasonable, it's a worthy point of consideration, and they're acting in good faith? And that's actually, you'll find that's the majority of people that you talk with, especially when we come from that orientation ourselves.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a game of reciprocation and co-creation that we're involved in here as human beings, as earthlings, extensions of this planet. We come in all shades and colors and different our hair and eye and colors and whatnot, but
And
we're all
temperamental dispositions as well. Some people are just naturally angrier than other people, or sillier than other people, or
right,
you don't want to be the grays,
or a little bit softer.
Like if humanity just became this, everybody's the same and just the whatever average between everything, that would be terribly boring, man.
Would be. And who wants to believe something just because it's popular? The Buddha gave us great advice on that. Don't believe anything just because it seems true and everybody says so.
Well,
don't believe anything just because the authorities say it's true, or your parents or your elders or religious teacher says it's true. Only believe once you've looked into it for yourself and found it to be good and true for one and all.
There's a logical fallacy. I forget what it's called, but it's basically the "it is known" fallacy. The world, of course the world's flat. Everybody knows the world's flat. Of course it's flat, dummy.
Everyone says it. That's what everyone's believed
so
for
that
thousands of years.
It is known fallacy. I forget what the actual fallacy is, but it's something that's so true that we actually have a logical fallacy tied up around it. It's like don't just because everybody's saying it is, just go with it, because I'm sorry, but everybody can be wrong.
Things are never
we
so
have
cut and
all
dry.
been all of us, back when we thought the Earth was flat, we were all wrong about that.
Yeah.
when we thought that we were the center of the universe, we were all wrong about that until somebody questioned and was like, well, I don't know. I've been doing some charting and some math and stuff. And it actually kind of seems like, yeah, the moon goes around us, but we go around the sun, and then the other planets are kind of doing their thing. And what'd he say? Shut him up.
Yeah, right.
Lock him in the tower
too
until
much,
he
too
repents.
fast, man.
Yeah, But, it's... So, yeah, at this point, we have Augustine, really trying to come to grasp with his own ickiness and the ickiness of the world. And he says the
evil is so strong, it's like a hole in being that's sucking the light away.
Yeah.
He wishes desperately to find a way to overcome, and we were getting to how that he found the agape in Christianity as this key, or as maybe the strongest point for him to focus on. Now, to help basically come to terms with Paul and the inner conflict that he shares with Paul now that he's discovered Paul. So at the heart of reason is love. Eden is fleeting, so cultivate that garden.
Oh, yeah. We might need to go back just a few.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll go back. I think that's a good spot right there. Okay. Cool, guys. We're jumping back in now.
So, notice what we now have. Let's put this together very carefully in Augustine. And notice the way he's putting it. He's not putting it out there as a theory. He's writing an autobiography. He's talking about it in a perspectival and participatory way. He writes the first autobiography, the Confessions. This is not a dry academic treatise. This is an existential manual how you can also go through the process that he has gone through. It is gnosis through and through. Okay, so from Plotinus, what do we have? Well, Plotinus already has given us, because part of Plotinus is the Aristotelian worldview. That's the nomological order we talked about, right? The conformity theory, right? The geocentric worldview, the two things in attunement. This is the best science account of the structure of reality and how reality is known. From Plotinus himself, we get now what I'm going to call the normative order. Plotinus gave us an account of how we can move in a coordinated fashion up the levels of reality, up the levels of consciousness, up the levels of the self, from what is less real to what is more real. What's Augustine going to do with that? Well, look, what's less real? What's down here has less oneness, less integration. It makes less sense. Look, when I destroy something, what do? I take away its structural functional organization. I make it more disordered. Right? As I go downward, things are fragmenting, having less and less form, less and less eidos. They're less and less intelligible. They're less and less understandable. This becomes more and more pure chaos. I'm losing truth. I'm losing goodness. I'm losing beauty. I'm losing what makes things to be and what makes them to be sensible and intelligible. This is evil. Down here is that's the hole. That's the tear in being towards which things can fall. But I can also move up to what's more true, more good, more real. And of course, what Plotinus knows is that this is driven by a love of knowing what is real and simultaneously becoming what is more real. And so for Augustine, this of course, And Plato even called it, if you remember, the good. This is the normative order. The nomological order tells you how things are structured. The normative order tells you how you can become better, how you can deal with evil, and how you can increase realness, meaning in your life. Augustine takes that, and as I've shown you, he says, wait, the thing about Aristotle is, well, you know what? Everything was moving to get where it belongs, right? But that's all it is in Aristotle. But I think, Augustine is basically saying, that everything is moving in a way in order to try and move us away from evil towards goodness. And so he says, I think Christianity puts these two together. The world, everything is moving on purpose, and the purpose is to try and afford realization, both cognitive and in the world. Things are becoming more real, we're becoming more real, we're realizing that. And then he says, and you know what? All of this is driven by love and about the transformation that happens in me, the gnosis agape. That's the narrative order of Christianity. There's this great narrative, there's this great story about the course of history. And the course of history is a course, right, of moving, right, towards a final consummation, the promised land. And that is the history of God's love, of God's agape, of God intervening and creating the open future. But that agape isn't just a historical force, it's also a normative force in me. It's also leading me upward towards the good. What Augustine does is he says, Christianity can put all of these things together. The world is organized this way so that it moves through history this way so that all of us can self-transcend this way. All three orders come together in a mutually supporting fashion. Now, we know from current cognitive science, right, that the three components of meaning that people talk about, the things that contribute to meaning in life, and this is Henselman's work and others, are a sense of coherence. I'll explain what this means in a minute. A sense of significance and a sense of purpose. I got to talk to Samantha Henselman about this. The more coherent, the more intelligible, the more things fit together for you, the more real they are, the more meaningful you find your life. Well, that's the nomological order. How things fit together and make sense in a coherent fashion. What about significance? Significance is this. How valuable, how deep in reality, how good are the elements of your life? That's the normative order. Purpose. Does your life have a direction? Is it moving in a course? That's the narrative order. Human beings want things to make sense. They need a nomological order. And Augustine says, I have this. It's the Aristotelian world order, and I can give a Christian explanation of that. They want things to be significant. They want to satisfy the anagogic drives of inner peace and contact with reality. And Augustine says, I can tell you that because I can tell you how to put reason and agape together. That's what Christianity does. And people want things to have a purpose. They want there to be, right, a story. Christianity is offering the ultimate story. Augustine puts it all together. And he puts it all together as the Roman Empire is literally collapsing. He's in Hippo in North Africa when the barbarians are literally at the gate laying siege to the city. And he's basically laying the foundations for what's going to come next. He's laying foundations for the medieval worldview. But what do we have from this? What we have, right, and we'll come back to the cognitive science, what we have is a very long and powerful history that tells us how our culture has articulated the axial revolution, how it has given a grammar, a way of understanding what the axial revolution has given us. It has given us a system for interpreting and inhabiting a worldview in which meaning and wisdom, as understood by the axial revolution, have been developed and have been articulated in a sophisticated and compelling fashion. Meaning is to have a nomological order that connects us to what is real. It is to have a normative order that connects us, not intellectually, but existentially, to what is good so that we can become better. Meaning is to have a narrative order that tells us how we can move forward through history, both collective and individual history. But what I've tried to show you is that these are not three separate things. They're like the three dimensions, right, of a space, the space of meaning. They're the three axes of the space of meaning. This is a beautiful synthesis. It's the culmination of tremendous amount of historical development. It's profound. And it's not just an intellectual thing. It is, as I've tried to show you, it is simultaneously a scientific thing, a spiritual thing, a therapeutic thing, an existential thing. This is why this is going to last 1,000 years. Because it is such a powerful and enriching vision. Imagine if you could, what if I could offer this to you and make it deeply historically, scientifically, and intellectually viable for you? What if I could offer to you a worldview that had the deepest scientific legitimacy, totally integrated with the most profound spirituality, no antagonism, no irrationality in it, conjoined seamlessly with a personal project of therapy, of therapeutic change and healing, and sapiential education, the cultivation of genuine wisdom and self-transcendence, in community with yourself, your world, your culture, and other people. Would you not want this? So here's the question you now have to ask yourself. Why don't you have it? Because we know from the science that's what you want. We know from the history that that's what our culture has, like our foundational culture from the axial revolution built for us. Why don't we have it? Is it irredeemably lost? When we lost the Gnostic mythology, when we lost the axial mythology, the two worlds of mythology, when we lost the mythology of Christianity, are we now bereft forever? So, part of the way I can start to answer that, the short answer for a long series of arguments that are forthcoming is no. I think there is a response. That's why this series is entitled Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, not despairing because of the meaning crisis.
All right. Good halfway point. Shoo. Yeah, man.
Well, I came up for a good symbol from awakening from the meaning crisis. I'll draw it here big so you can see it.
Oh, cool.
This is the combination of those three: coherence, significance, and
Purpose.
purpose.
Or the nomological order,
So,
narrative, and
yeah.
Christianity together.
So you can see this. There is a line with some other lines crossing it. So the lines crossing the other line is the nomological order.
Looks like an arrow pointed up with 3 lines in the shaft of the arrow, 3 horizontal lines, so the arrow is pointing straight up.
All right, so now that you've seen that,
There you go.
so the arrow is your direction, the narrative order, the purpose, and the movement up the line. So there's a line and then the cap. The line is the significance, like where are you in most significant or less significant. It's good to like create symbols for yourself for ideas, so that when he mentions this triad again, or if for anything, you can have a little symbol you can jot real quick and then make a piece of jewelry out of it, and people ask you about it, and then you'd be like, oh, let me tell you about this. I don't know. Awakening.
And this is depicting this idea of being in a state of more order,
going
and
towards and always
oneness and
Yeah.
wholeness, you could say, and going down is less integration. So more integration versus less integration, more towards goodness and truth, or more down and towards chaos and evil.
Yeah, and or you could think of it as like more real and less real. And if we define, less real being less integrated, less eidos, less, reason. So we call those things,
That's reliable reasoning skill and aptitude.
And we'd call that end, chaos or evil, right? And that's, I always wondered why we combine the ideas of chaos with evil. Because, like the chaos of the universe definitely isn't an evil thing. That's what led to life.
No.
The chaos within the soup that made all DNA and all that stuff, the chaos of nature. But I can understand in this end is like going from more understanding than breaking it all apart. Unnatural, what would you call it?
From integration to disintegration.
Or entropy would be the down as well. Disintegrating, like literally, like integrated.
From a giving, good, loving force of co-creation to a destructive force. So it's just 2 ways of understanding.
And so
how we can be in a more comprehensive, more comprehensible, more clear state and participation with reality, or we can be in a state of less truth, less goodness, less beauty, more ugliness, more breakdown.
So Augustine,
Augustine
really, he believed that there is a moving purpose that is moving to afford more realization, but it's driven by love. That's the driving force that is moving. And this goes back to many episodes ago.
This is a way that he can overcome his despair and live more truthfully and good.
And he's using an older psychotechnology more goodly. He's using a psychotechnology that came, or an idea from way before, and that idea was everything has like a kind of a mover behind it and a purpose. But I wish I could remember the word he used for it. But the idea that things have a purpose, everything has a purpose that it's doing. And in his case,
autopoetic.
Autopoetic is
I think that might be one of the terms.
I think that's what it is. And this purpose is to afford realization, to afford to make allowances, to make the ability to gain realization.
Yes, that's the very reasoning. That was the very reason that Augustine wrote Confessions from this autobiographical perspective. The first time that this had been done in this way is perspectival. It was autopoetic, and it was an existential manual for the process of gnosis. You could say. So moving up and down.
Well, yeah.
Everything is moving on purpose to afford realization of oneself in the world. Yes, there we go. I see you. Yeah, and it's all driven by love. This was the realization.
Yeah.
And this is the narrative order of Christianity.
Yeah.
This is the way that the course of history, moving towards this final culmination, this promised land, this heaven, this enlightenment, this gnosis, this is how the story has been told.
And it's
a culmination of everything that came before, philosophically.
Yeah. And by normative, it makes things more real.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a historical narrative can really help with the making something more real. Mm-hmm. If it is only just a salience increase.
Yes.
But still,
that's why the narrative is ordered the way it is in the Bible.
Yeah.
So,
and it's like he said, it's like a story. It's a story about how we've moved into and through the axial age.
Mm-hmm. It's a historical, and it's also a story of how that force you were talking about in us, that's calling us, that's pulling us to move towards the good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And all three orders that Augustine says need to come together in mutual supportive action are the coherence, significance, and purpose. Coherence we find through the nomological realization. The more intelligible something is for us, the more the parts fit together in our mind and in our salience worldview. Mixing words up here. The more intelligible, the more
ontological real. Worldview.
Ontological, thank you. And the more real, the more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So life has more meaning when we are seeing more clearly, and we can allow what is most salient to us in the moment to be what our attention draws forth, rather than just being pulled around by our thoughts and by the environment.
Sure.
Significance, how valuable, how deep does this strike us, the sense of it in reality. And this Christianity helped bring about this. And then we have the purpose, which is the direction, the narrative.
And so what gives it its stick-aroundness? He mentioned like you could imagine, like, your dimensionality of coherence, significance, and purpose. And if it has the maximal amount of all three, like any good story, where it's got coherence, there's more real and less real, very organized in that way.
There's a sense of direction and its purpose.
And then there's a significance, like,
yes.
of how good, like good in the sense of, less chaos, good,
yes.
that good. And then it has a narrative purpose. So if you're to just make a story out of this, you could actually probably hijack this system to improve your writing if you're a story writer. Like this concept of, think about,
it's got to be coherent, intelligible, so that's real and meaningful. It's got to be
significant. Like, so how good is it? So you could do that in a story of, like, if you're writing something that's within our age, what topics are you touching on?
How impactful are the themes?
And usually you want to write a book that makes people feel like, this is
can
good.
You go into reality,
How good is he at like immersing you? How good, we use it. How good?
How good is the actor? How good is the director?
And then the
purpose of it,
and that's the proper narrative.
Moving into in a course. The narrative. So in Christianity, Augustine discovers satisfies that anagogic drive, with psychological drive in human beings and other mammals. We've recognized crows and dolphins and other things and monkeys and so on. The drive for inner peace and harmony. We all have drives for anagogic experiences, higher states, altered states of consciousness, because we're seeking out that deep inner peace and harmony that comes through these experiences. And Christianity provides the ultimate story. Augustine puts all of this together right in the midst of the darkness of Rome in this time.
Yeah, and he believed, and I think it's kind of evident, but Christianity is not antagonistic. It is also therapeutic. It's what is it? Sapiatic, as in cultivates wisdom and real understanding and learning. And it is also scientific in a certain sense, not scientific. It's not going to teach you how to land on the moon or nothing like that or understand it, but scientific in another.
And we're not saying we're saying Christianity in the sense that he saw it through its gnosis,
Yes,
as the early Gnostics saw it, as the way, as a way of being, not just a bunch of precepts and dogma that you blindly believe in, and there's an institution that's going to do all of these horrible things to millions of people in the name of this way.
Well,
it's obviously, there's some poor examples of the way, even by the churches themselves.
You have dogma, and you can only be gnosis. So that's the modal confusion right there.
Yeah.
Like, you know, my biggest gripe for a lot of organized religion or practices is the confusion of dogma for the being mode. Because the dogma is you have a rule set. You have things that you have to do. Opposed to you are doing things. You are participating in it. And that's where it's at.
Yeah,
that's where it's at. You know, that's where the understanding
that really
lies.
does seem to be where it's at. It's beyond the mere belief that stories are true. It's what are the stories pointing to? What's the deepest truth? What's the realer than real that's being told here?
I believe that the aquatic ape theory is true, but what is that doing for me? Just believing it.
Right.
You know, it's like, come on now. Like, no, there's something it's trying to teach you. What is it trying to teach you? You should probably try to figure that out.
It's a realization, a part of our human story, and helps at least deepen the profundity of the experience of being a human being and recognizing the long history of evolution behind us.
Yeah, and you know, like in Christianity, I guess at its time was not necessarily doing anything completely new. It was just using older psychotechnologies and techniques and ideas and coming and birthing something new out of that.
And the early Gnostics, with this love for this idea of this God beyond gods, that was this ultimate good, that represented this way of agape and the God of the New Testament versus this old way of seeing gods before and the God of the Old Testament. That's a really significant contribution. And I love how Vervaeke, he gets all excited. He's like, this is such a powerful, enriching vision. And it's lasted for 1,000 years for a reason. It's because, yes, we are certainly all, I love the idea that we're all born sinners because it makes sense. Like, we are fallible. We are not perfect beings. We have to constantly work to stay on course. We can miss the mark. We can fall short.
That actually gives me some hope, because being born a sinner means that you were born with a directionality and a purpose
to overcome that.
Yeah. Well,
this
like,
is your challenge.
This
is what you're
you're immediately born with it, but you're gonna miss, and that's fine. The arrow keeps going.
That's
and
part of it.
You tune in as you go.
It's how we get to know and define what love is.
Well, that's a lot better than just being like, you're full of sin, and you know, like, we got to beat the devil out of you or whatever.
Self-reflective, aware extensions of this living planet and this strange, miraculous cosmos, and perhaps of God itself.
It's the greatest gift I've ever been given.
How would you realize? How would you know love? You know, you say you know everything there is to know, but you haven't experienced it. So you big bang boom, experience it all, and now all the different ways that humans can feel and express and know love are being lived out and experienced, and love being the source of what causes things to become more realized. I really love that concept as well that we were introduced to here in this episode. Everything is moving on this purpose to forward the realization not just of ourselves but of the world itself. Things are evolving and becoming more and more and more. Life, has become trees. Trees are super evolved plants. I mean, sharks are older than trees. Sharks have been around for a minute, but it gives you an idea of how evolved this trees must be, because we know that plants existed for a long time before animals came around. Yet they're so recent in plant history.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know where I was going there with the trees, but I was hanging with the trees today, and they were beautiful.
The trees leaf and the leaf trees.
That they do. Alan Watts. So this powerful, enriching version, it's scientifically, we know therapy works, and the process of gnosis is what actually led to psychotherapy as we know it. Is that very much like they're at the root. The intentionality of this philosophical way of framing reality became so enmeshed and embedded in our culture that it became our therapeutic techniques over time. This way that we've been framing reality ever since this realization of Augustine, really helped bring the light of Christianity to the world as this gift that did help lift a lot of people up. It helped people find some moral groundwork and way of working together. And there's a lot of beautiful examples of this in Buddhism and so on and so forth. Not to take away from anyone, because there's a small tribe somewhere that we'll never know that did something just as beautiful. But here we are, understanding ourselves as human beings and trying to awaken from this meaning crisis. Is there anything else on this part here?
Nope. He's just starting to get excited about. Oh, I have a note. The question came up. Well, have we just lost it all? Is it like all lost? It's like, well, no, it's not all lost, and that's what
this
we're
whole
doing
series
here.
is dedicated
That's what
to.
we're doing here, is trying to reclaim, to remember, to sati, truly
Yes.
remember the things that we've been through, but removing the pieces that don't work.
And reminding ourselves, remembering the sense of the sacred.
Yeah, and becoming more good.
Yeah.
We're coming out of chaos, trying to piece things together, to reintegrate,
Yeah.
as opposed to disintegrate.
Yeah. So now we delve into the sacred.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's jump back in.
Back them up like 10 seconds. I believe.
Right on.
I
Let me go ahead and
believe.
back us up just a wee bit here before we jump back in.
That's why this series is entitled Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, not despairing because of the meaning crisis. But we're only halfway through, right? We're only halfway through posing the problem. We need to understand. We're getting an understanding of this meaning and this wisdom. We're getting how it was articulated and developed and woven into our cultural framework, our cognitive machinery, the very grammar of our existential modes. But we still don't know, why does it all fall apart? How does it all come apart? And where does that leave us? We need a better understanding of the genealogy now of the crisis. Now that we have a better historical understanding of the nature of the meaning that was lost, we need to understand the process of loss. So, as I said, this world is the world that Augustine bestows, and this is what you need to understand. There's tremendous loss when the Roman Empire collapses. It's not as great as the Bronze Age collapse, but it's major. But it's only in the West, by the way, not in the East. The Byzantine Empire survives. But nevertheless, there's a traumatic loss of cities, literacy, trade, commerce. The standard of living that was lost in the Roman Empire is not recovered again until 1750 in London, England. It takes that long for that standard of living to be recovered again. So this is very traumatic. But the heritage given by Augustine is so powerful that it serves as, and I'm using this word very carefully now, I hope you understand, it serves as a home for people throughout all of this turbulent turmoil. But some things start to happen that start to pull it apart. This sacred canopy starts to be torn apart and can no longer shelter us from our terrors and our despair. So one of the first things is, in 1054, there's a division. And I'm not going to go into all, part of it has to do with that the Roman Empire in the West collapses, but it doesn't collapse in the East. The East is Greek-speaking, the West is Latin-speaking. That in addition to Augustine, the East is deeply influenced by Dionysius, pseudo-Dionysius. Also the case in the West. But there's a lot of cultural, historical, socioeconomic differences in how Christianity was understood. And they split apart. There's what's called the Great Schism. So Christianity splits between an Eastern Orthodox and what's going to be called a Catholic version of Christianity. This, of course, weakens Christianity. It also has an impact on it. By separating itself from the East, Christianity loses some of the connection, at least the Christianity in the West, Western Europe. Christianity loses some of its deeper connections to that Neoplatonic mystical theology. That starts to have an impact. The West starts to become less and less Platonic and more Aristotelian. Now, as always, this starts, right? This starts with a change in psychotechnology. So, Ivan Illich has done some work looking at the work of Hugh of St. Victor, who was around from 1096 to 1141. And what he points out, and Chetham talks about this in his book, in his books, and Chetham also refers, as Corbin does too. Corbin talks about this. Chetham talks about this, refers to the work of Krantz and others. Trying to summarize a lot of this, what's happening is there's a shift in reading, how people read, right? And it's after the schism. So before that, and this is something I can speak to from first person, before that, reading is done largely aloud. People read aloud. They read the Bible, for example, because that's mostly the only thing that can be read. And some of the church fathers, people like Augustine, for example, they read aloud. Reading is often done communally. So first of all, you're embedded in a cultural context. You're embedded in a sapiential community. You read aloud, and more than you read aloud, you're reciting. So let's try and get something in your experience that might bring this out, okay? Think of the difference between reading a poem and reciting a poem. And it's no coincidence, by the way, that when Gabriel spoke to Muhammad, he told him to recite, not to write. Okay? What happens when you... something wonderful. Last Saturday was my birthday, and so it was a surprise party. My partner, she organized a wonderful party for me. And I'd always said that instead of gifts, I would prefer it if people brought one of their favorite pieces of poetry and read it aloud. So it was a poetry party. And people read it aloud. And there's such a difference between reading a poem silently and reading it aloud, because the intonation and the sharing it with others makes it very different. What was particularly beautiful is my girlfriend, actually, she's a gifted singer. She actually sang her version of the poem by Robert Frost. It's the famous one about the two roads diverge, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. But when somebody is singing a song, singing a poem, and most songs are poems if you think about it, right? It is appealing to you not just propositionally. It's not just, right, that kind of knowing. It's not just trying to create beliefs in you. First of all, by reciting the poem, right, you and trying to communicate it to others, you have to bring in all your know-how of communication. Being able to share with other people. You have to, all your ways of paying attention, much more embodied. There's the perspectival stuff. What does it feel like? What is it like to be here in this space, in this context, with these people, uttering these words? And with that, it has the potential to be participatory, because people are like, these are poems that have changed them, have made a difference to their identity. They know these poems not the way you know the words on the back of your cereal box. They know these poems because of the way in which they have been changed by them. Their very sense of identity has been altered by it. See, so when people were reading then, they're reading the Bible, they're reciting it communally. They're also doing something, and I do this practice now, and other people do, right? It's called Lectio Divina. It's a way of reading a text, right? In which you are not speak. The point is not to have the propositions and to speak. It is to let the text as much as possible speak to you. It is to engage with the text in a meditative, mindful fashion, opening yourselves up to the possibility of it transforming you. It is much more like going to listen to a piece of music and having prepared yourself, prepared the receptivity to have a profound aesthetic experience. It's analogous to that. You're reading and you're reciting in such a way that you're trying to open yourself up to this text speaking to you. People that are religious will often talk about this as if God is present in the text and speaking to them through the text. This is how people were reading. It's a form of reading that is ontologically remedial. It's designed to heal you, transform you. It's designed to trigger, activate, and educate your procedural, perspectival, and participatory knowing. Not just give you propositions. It's about helping you in your reading remember the being mode and not just have beliefs and propositions. But people start to read differently shortly thereafter. What's happening is people are shifting from, right? So, Avicenna, which is an anglicized form of Ibn Sina, who's a great Persian philosopher, he was, up until this time, the dominant interpreter of that Augustinian worldview, that whole Augustinian way. And he gives priority to the Neoplatonic. And Corbin is going to make a lot of the fact that Persian philosophy was always trying to keep the Neoplatonic and Gnostic elements of spirituality alive. Persia has played a much greater role in world history and cultural history than we have properly given credit to in the so-called West. But he gets replaced by Averroes, right? And Averroes is more purely Aristotelian. And what that really means is a shift to giving exclusive priority to definitions. Remember, Aristotle tried to understand essences, the eidos as essences and essences as definitions. And that's very problematic because many things don't have definitions. But definitions and propositions. So people now start to read silently to themselves, and what they give priority to, right, is coherence within a language rather than transformation within themselves and the world. So what matters is how the various symbols, and I don't mean that in a spiritual sense, the various propositional terms and logical connectives fit together coherently. So a new model for thought emerges. See, the old model was thought is a conforming to the world, and then we got this articulated and developed and expanded into this whole process of gnosis and anagoge and self-transformation. That model of knowing, that's also a way of being, that's also a way of becoming, that's being taken away, and it's being replaced by a different model. Thought, knowing, is to have coherent propositional language. Thinking is to have a coherent set of propositions in your head. So Kranz talks about we shift from the extensive self, the self that is transjectively connected to the world, that understands itself in terms of its conformity to the world, to, right, an intensive self. This is a self that's inside my head. It's inside my beliefs. Myself is primarily the way I talk to myself by affirming my beliefs through propositional language. So people start to think that the primary way in which we know things is to get as much coherence within our inner language than instead of conformity in our outer existential modes. Now, why would people make this shift? People make this shift because the world is starting to open up again. People are starting to get interested in knowing the world scientifically. We're getting, it's just slowly beginning here, right? But we're going to get the move towards the value of having, and by the way, I believe in this value. I'm a scientist, right? The value of logically coherent, well-organized propositional theories. The power of this is being discovered. So when I can read in this other way, right, I can empower my argumentative skills tremendously. What I'm losing, right, what I'm losing is I'm losing reading as a psychotechnology of psycho-spiritual existential transformation. Reading is now becoming the consumption of propositions and their structuring in logical coherency. Why? Well, as I said, there's the beginning of this reorientation towards the external world, and it's being driven by the fact that Aristotle is coming into prominence because he's being rediscovered. So because of the Crusades, there is a rediscovery of the works of Aristotle that had largely been lost to Western Europe. And in Aristotle, there is a problem for Christianity. There's a problem for Christianity. The problem is we have a figure that can't be ignored. Aristotle is part of that whole ancient world that Augustine gave us. He's the author of the nomological order that Augustine has baptized with Christianity's approval. So Aristotle can't be ignored, but Aristotle describes a world that does not have a lot of the Christian mythology attached to it, and offers explanations for things that Christianity makes no effort to explain. So there is this tremendous attraction to the power, the new explanatory power provided by Aristotle. And the model he gives of getting clear definitions and clear syllogistic inferences and building up a very clear picture is enmeshed with this new way of reading and this new way of experiencing knowing and experiencing oneself primarily inside one's head, inside one's language. So Aristotle can't be ignored or rejected because of his eminent authority, but neither can he simply be assimilated into the Christian worldview, because he talks about and explains things and does things in a manner that you don't find in the Bible. So more and more people are reading in this new way. They're starting to emulate the new, right, Aristotelian science. But this is starting to cause a crisis within Christianity. And so there's an individual who arises who sees the looming threat that this poses, who sees two things happening. There's a change in the psychotechnology of reading, and there is a change in how people are starting to look at the world. Both of these changes are associated with the difficulty of assimilating the rediscovered Aristotle into a Christian worldview. But Thomas Aquinas takes up the task of solving this problem. He's going to be a pivotal figure precisely for that reason. Now, again, Thomas Aquinas, voluminous writing, and there's a whole group of people, both theologians and philosophers, Thomistic, and there's all kinds of controversy around, how Aristotelian Aquinas is, how Platonic he is, right? I'm going to again try and present the way I think he was historically taken up and basically understood. So, for Aquinas, how do we salvage both the Christian worldview and the new science of the rediscovered Aristotle? Well, he does something really brilliant. He goes to the fundamental grammar of all of this. What's the fundamental grammar of this? It's the mythology of the two worlds. The axial revolution is there's two worlds. There's the real world and the illusory world, right? And that has been a constant throughout all of this. And he comes up with a way of trying to assimilate it, right? So we have the two worlds, right? Here's in Plato, in the Platonic, and even in the Augustinian, here's the everyday world, right? And then here is the real world. But what Aquinas does is he changes that. He says, this world is real too. There is real knowledge of this world possible. This is knowledge that we can get through reason and science. So reason and science study this world, and they can discover real truths about that through reason, through science. But this world up here is still somehow more real. How do we do that? Well, he invents a distinction that we tend to anachronistically push back on people before, and there are definitely precursors in Pseudo-Dionysius and Augustine, but the idea is this is the natural world that can be studied by reason and by science. This is the world above the natural world. What's the word for above? Super. So this is the supernatural world. And this is not a world that can be studied by science or reason. This is a world that is only, right, accessible by faith. So there's, now the two worlds have been made sort of fundamentally two separate kinds of worlds, and there isn't a continuum between them now. There isn't a way of moving through them by love and reason united together. What now happens is the following, and what's going to happen is the notion of faith is going to be changed too. Reason is down here, and love is up here. And the idea for Aquinas, I should say, is that love moves the will. See, in Plotinus, and even in Augustine, love moves reason. But for Aquinas, love moves the will. Love moves the will to assert things that it can't know through reason. So faith now becomes the act of willful assertion. Now, to be fair to Aquinas, this is not willful in the sense of my will. This is a will that is being driven by the love of God. But nevertheless, what's now happening is love and reason are being pulled apart. Faith is going from this participation in the flow, the course of history, to the assertion of propositions, the assertion of statements, giving a creed, and more fundamentally, right, science and spirituality are now being divorced from each other in a profound way, such that if it's scientific, it's not spiritual, and if it's spiritual, it's not scientific. And if you're talking, and you can see the beginnings of Romanticism. If it has to do with love, then it has nothing to do with reason. And if it has anything to do with reason, then it has nothing to do with love. And all of these things are now being pulled apart. Now Aquinas is a wonderful man, a wonderful writer. He is trying to save, right, the axial worldview by reformulating its fundamental grammar of two worlds into a formulation that is now becoming familiar to you. But here's the danger, and this is not a danger that Aquinas foresees. As this becomes more and more successful, and we less and less find our assertions, our will being driven by love, but just by willpower alone, this world becomes less and less real to us. The supernatural world. And if there is no supernatural world, if it's no longer, and listen to my language, if it's no longer viable to us, we can think about it and imagine it, but if it's no longer livable to us, then the whole axial world mythology, the whole axial world grammar that gave us the grammar of meaning and wisdom and self-transcendence, that huge heritage is now threatened to fall apart. We'll start looking at that next time together. Thank you for your time and attention.
Yeah, man. Wow.
The process of loss.
Dude, that was powerful at the end. Yeah. Yeah, so we...
Augustine's, or the Augustusness. That's how I have it written down.
Augustine.
Oh, man, my writing is terrible. His world was a world of loss and trauma. Like, literally, cities, literature, trade, commerce. And, well, we can kind of relate to that, too. We have a lot of failing cities. Literacy rates are at an all-time low. Mm-hmm. Trade is becoming harder and longer.
The sacred canopy has been torn apart and can no longer shelter us.
And so we didn't get back to the levels of cities, literature, trade, and, all that until the 1700s in England.
After the fall of Rome. Yeah, it took till like 1750 for us to get back to that level.
That's a hit. It's not as bad as like you said, not as bad as the Bronze Age collapse, but like the Bronze Age collapse is barely rememberable history for us. There's still a lot of things. It's like we don't know why, but we know
we were starting to have even iron making technology back then towards the end of the Bronze Age. We had well-developed languages, philosophies, mathematics, medicine, and all of that was completely forgotten. A large number of civilizations the world over suddenly just disappeared. These old languages completely forgotten. We have barely any history on the Bronze Age.
And so this experience for people like the followers of this new proposition, they were experiencing a profound sense of domicile, in the sense of it was a home. These ideas and philosophy and this type of Christianity was a home to be in.
Yeah.
And now it's falling apart.
Yeah, and part of this was due to, of course, the schism between the East Orthodox and the Western Catholics.
Yeah,
in,
so
1054, the division. So that sense of deep connection to Neoplatonism was lost. That Neoplatonic philosophy that was so deeply imbued in Christianity.
And that mystical aspect, the mysticism aspect
much of that was lost.
Christianity.
Yeah, so the East, for the West at least. Yeah. East Orthodox has really kept it alive, but yet check out East Orthodox if you're interested in, because it's quite intriguing to see how Christianity continued on in the East. So then around 1096 to 1141, there was Victor and then Chetham, a number of minds that were recognizing this shift in how people were reading. The psychotechnology of reading is changing.
Yeah, that's interesting. That we
went
just
from
the simple fact of not reading it aloud anymore and not reciting it.
Yes.
Because like we use the word recital, like when you're singing something or doing a dance thing, you're not just
it's a particular mode
doing it.
It's a very interactive mode of being.
And that
I love the way he describes
the sharing of it makes the difference too.
So people previously in this time, they read aloud in community, and it was this art of recitation versus just reading out loud. So people, like the difference between reciting a poem and reading a poem, as Vervaeke states. I love how he talks about how songs, they don't just appeal propositionally, like in the lyrics of the song, the words that are being said aren't just propositions for you to believe, and though that might be part of the artist's intention, the songs hit us on so many levels, and in the sharing of them as well. You have to bring about all of your know-how, so your perspectival aspect of knowing, and because you are a participant in this event, and you have a perspective of the experience of it as it's happening, and in that it's participatory with an audience.
And knowing by being changed too.
Poems can change us. Songs
while
can
you're
change us.
reciting it, you are being changed by the reciting.
So that's why it's
of it.
participatory.
Yeah.
It's a co-creation at that point. So that's a totally different style of reading. I can see that, because your reality can be altered by a well-read poem or a great line in a movie. Things like that can, in songs, of course, change us, alter our reality. There's that old style of lectio divina.
Lectio divina.
Lectio, thank you. Lectio. Oh yeah, electro. I'm looking at my eye.
Lectro.
Lectio divina.
Yeah, let the text
reading.
speak to you. You're opening up to the text.
Divine text.
And you're preparing a receptivity. And he mentioned that's what, when people feel like, the God is there, when you read scripture together and you read it together, and that feeling of God
present
in the text, and it moves through you.
Speaking through the text to heal, transform, to actualize, educate, and help us remember the being mode. That's the way reading was looked at. It's helped you remember the being mode, the state of oneness with reality and with God.
Yeah, so that's...
Not just to have propositions.
So that was the way, I guess, the Eastern Christianity and what Christianity up to that point, that's where they were at. And then there's this Aristotelian shift.
Yes,
into the exclusive priority
of logic and reason,
definitions and propositions.
Yes,
and that's to me, that's kind of like, like for certain aspects that's cool, but it's just irritating when it's just arguing, what the meaning of that word and the meaning of that word. It's okay, well, I mean it to mean this, and the meaning's not really
that's
that
all
important.
And that became how we think too, propositionally through our language in our minds. And so it became more silent reading. You're right, definitions and propositions. So coherence becomes even more important than experiencing the being mode. This is very useful for us as we became as we became more scientifically adept beings. This helped us develop technology. This helped us understand things that we couldn't have understand before about the everyday world. But it's certainly in this new model for thought.
Well, it doesn't really have
It
room.
definitely caused a split in our own minds almost too. Our sense of connection with the sacred is really begun to be obliterated at this point.
Yeah,
Slowly but surely.
The silent reading doesn't. Well, I guess silent reading with the exclusive priority to definitions and propositions.
For learning, it's fine. Sure.
Well,
we forgot how to do the
but
being mode
but
reading.
it lacks the personal transcendence aspect. So you're reading it for what's its proposition and what's the language and everything in there, and you're not really
useful for how to build a cabinet, but how to build a human being, not as useful.
But to experience a poem, like a poem is best when it's allowed to be a poem, not when you're breaking it down into okay, these stanzas and this, that, and then it's just like, you know.
So we had a shift in priorities. What we're prioritizing now is mostly logic and reason, and it's less about stuff about the being mode. So we less and less practice this style of reading, which you can think of yourself having maybe engaged in before. And it works very well with a good part of a fiction story that really inspires you, or something along those lines, maybe an autobiography.
And we went from the conforming model of the world, as in you're conforming to the world in the best way, in the most harmonious way to the world, and
the gnosis process of anagoge and self-transformation of being and becoming. That was the old way of reading.
And now I guess now at this point, not physically now, but now in this time frame,
the new thought.
The new thought is just having a coherent language with proper language. Everything means what it's supposed to be.
Clear propositions,
and
so then we had this shift to this intensive sense of self.
And overanalyzation of the language opposed to getting on in the world and transcending yourself, which is the ultimate goal. And I'm not dogging it, I'm not dogging this mode of thought, but I can see where the pitfalls are.
Because how we begin to know ourselves at this point is more so by our propositions. We're looking for more conformity outside and in the way that we can formulate our language and ideas about ourselves, rather than engaging in a becoming process, a self-transformative practice.
And the big why for why did this shift happen is, well, the world's opening again, it's repairing. And people are curious, they want to know more about the world, and in this, more scientific way. Like you can imagine in more recent history when we started making electricity being a thing, and they lit up the World's Fair, and it was like, and everybody was like, science, we're in the future now. And
so
it's natural to be curious about, like, okay, what is this world? What are these techniques that we can use to understand?
It's a beautiful thing that happens, in fact, but there was a downside. We would just begin to put a lot more value into the well-organized propositional theories than in that sense of the sacred anymore. Less and less because of the power it was given us over the natural environment. So when I can read this way, my argumentative skills go up. My ability to prove something or affect the natural world is increasing. But I'm losing reading as a transformative tool. And so we're having this wide-scale movement from engaging into more logical coherency. Aristotle's being rediscovered, and the Crusades are occurring.
Which brought us a lot of, I'm putting myself in the shoes of the West, so which brought the West more of Aristotle that was lost to history. So now it's the old thing that's brand new now.
His explanatory power and his way that he could develop clear pictures and understanding comprehensive logical arguments was really attractive now at this point in history. And more and more we're more and more in our heads thinking according to language and proposition. There's more and more scientific thinking, and there's this crisis in Christianity now. We see the change in the psychotechnology.
Well, because we can't ignore Aristotle, because Aristotle's ideas are like this cornerstone of what Augustus.
Augustine and Aquinas.
Augustine, thank you. Sorry, so many Ugs and Ogs. It was, that's one of the cornerstones is what Aristotle was talking about, but it cannot be reconciled with Christianity either, because the stuff they're getting is pre-Christian.
Yes.
That
yes.
was lost. So there is no, or there's missing reference
Yes.
points with both of them. There's things that Aristotle explains that Christianity has no explanation for, that doesn't even bother, because it's, it's like
So now it's causing more of Christianity to come into question in the West.
well, like Christianity doesn't explain why the ball floats.
Right. Right.
It doesn't really need to. It doesn't have a
It's
spot
not
for
what
that
it's-
spot.
Yeah, it's not about breaking down the constituent matter of reality. It's about how to live.
Yeah.
A way of living. So this change in how things are no longer as associated and no longer as stitched together causes this crisis. We see this change in not just how people are reading, but how they actually look at the world and think within their own minds about themselves. So along comes Aquinas, this mystic who wants to try and find a way to stitch things back together. He wants to salvage the Christian worldview and
also this new
put it in
science
agreement
of
with
Aristotle.
this new science at the same time. So he's trying to assimilate the two, the real world and the everyday world that we learned about through Plato.
Yeah, the supernatural world and the natural world, the world of love and the world of reason. And I like this line that he had in there. Love moves the will to assist things
Yes.
it can't understand through reason.
Yes. That was really well said. Yeah. That was his point, because in moving from this idea, we create an even greater fracture in our sense of reality, and we separate it from this one world reality that we previously held into this idea of there's a natural world that can be studied with reason and science, and then there's this supernatural world. Now Aquinas is trying to say that both are real, but reason and science can be applied to the everyday world to discover real truths. And then this other higher supernatural real world is still more real, but there's no more continuum there. So that idea that's proposed, love is what moves the will, is a beautiful answer to that.
But it still seemed like these two worlds continued to fall further away from each other.
So they're still pulling apart.
And so now, faith becomes an assertion divorced from science.
And that's the problem.
And now the world, the supernatural world, the world of love, the real world that is still more real than the everyday world that is also real, becomes less real.
Yeah.
So
now we're trying to use reason to believe in the supernatural world, which makes no sense. So no wonder the psychological break. Faith becoming an assertion of belief rather than faithfulness, faithful involvement in the flow and the co-creative process of making the world better along with God.
Yeah.
That was lost. And that was the danger Aquinas did not see. He had this beautiful answer, but it was super compelling, and it gave people an excuse to engage even more in logic and reason at the downfall of, at the cost of less process of self-knowing and being and becoming transformative practices of prayer and meditation, contemplation, and so forth. The less we did that,
and you could almost break.
We even begin to see faith as an assertion of a belief, as a reason, as a tool of reason,
opposed to the thing that you
for
do
the supernatural.
And you
can't reason the supernatural in that way. You can only be and become.
Well, it seems that they're at this point in time, you could call it a modal world confusion, or a world modal confusion, in the sense of you could think of the world of love as one mode of being, and the natural world as another mode of being, and there's a confusion of which one, I hate to use this word, but has dominance in the relationship. It used to be this supernatural world is where sacred, everything comes that moves everything, and now
the sacred, the love of creation of God, of higher ideals, that is the ultimate reality.
And that's what moved the natural world.
The natural world.
But now, at this point in time, and I would argue at this point in time, that we are holding the real world above the supernatural world. So the world of reason over the world of love.
Yes, and the reason I think reason should be subservient to love is because you can come up with a really well-argued reason for doing a lot of really vicious, horrible, evil
Oh,
things.
you mean like depopulating people because
Sure.
we fart too much and
Right.
we're killing the ozone and all that jazz?
Yeah, right. Even though the population's looking to level out around 13 billion,
Yeah.
people are having less and less children, and need to less in more developed countries.
Well, the good thing about that is the more developed the country gets and the better people live, naturally,
Having less
the less
kids, we're
kids they
actually in
have.
danger of
So,
depopulation and not enough
yeah.
people to take care of keep the infrastructure running
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, Japan's right on
in the
the
future,
right
yeah.
on the edge of that right now, and
Certainly
it's
not enough
scary.
people to take care of themselves once they get older,
Yeah.
because they're not having kids to do so anymore.
Well, that's what the
Look forward
robots
to
are
the
for,
robots,
man.
Yeah.
And they're friendly, and they're like,
Yeah.
hey.
So
They freak me out.
love is important. We forgot to keep love on top.
Yep.
Because this idea, like, will as driven by love of God becomes less and less. Less and less will is now driven by love. The supernatural world becomes less real to people. Scientific revolution occurs, yes, but love being less and less viable in the supernatural world, less a livable reality, an interaction with the supernatural, less a livable reality. The heritage of self-transcendence becomes forgotten, and that shelter of of reason guided by love. You need wisdom to guide our reason. We need to not just be using our logic for pure evil and self-gain and self-interest, because it's a perfectly viable survival technique to lie, steal, and cheat.
So,
If there's no good, if there's no God, if there's no ultimate reason, if there's no agape or love or something that transcends us, that is a higher ideal for us to strive for.
I have an idea about why we don't see fairies and gnomes and angels and demons anymore and all those things that we have so many stories about. That, you know, some of these stories predate Christianity, and a lot of other things are just told over and over again. Perhaps as we've developed as reasoning beings, we've lost that world, that supernatural world,
Right.
being able to see the forces of nature and the universe as one, and, you know,
Yeah.
understand it
Yeah.
that way. And then, because, like, dude, the gremlins are there, and there's ways that you can get them to stop messing with your stuff. Leave a little alcohol and a remote for them.
Well, the native tribes here believe that you could communicate with your ancestors, especially in dreams. If you had a question, you would bring it to them when you were going to bed, and they would tell you in their dream. They'd instruct you on how to do the thing that you're trying to learn to do.
Yeah, so, like, ultimately, like, you know, even say if you're you know,
True or not, it's
like, say if you're like a pagan too, like, you know, this trying to figure out, like, particularly through, you know, the methods of Christianity would help you to be able to see the supernatural real world of love and everything even more, even being an earth worshipping pagan as well.
sure. Yeah.
And, you know, in Christianity, there's a lot of paganistic symbology and things in the art
Motifs
already
that were
there, because
incorporated to marry the two during the time.
and I think it's also because they're naturally very similar in their psychotechnology way of looking at the world and existing with the world, and you just enough to piece together and add more. You know, because you can't just force people to believe stuff. You have to, you know, make it similar enough, or find the similarities
Yes.
and bridge them
Yes.
together. And
That's-
there has to be similarities in order to make the shift. You know, you can get people to say they believe, but to actually get people to believe is a more well, you got to work with them, and you got to show them, and you got to figure out what they, you know, what they think, how they believe, and then augment, modify, move in. And, you know, there's a little bit of, you know, like, people take over people throughout the world, but also naturally, you know, cultures, ideas, religions, and everything, they move, they spread, they have a will of their own, if you will.
Right.
And you can see this through, like, you know, different styles of, you know, music and musical instruments and poetry and all types of things. You can see this core line moving through.
These movements just take on a life of their own, don't they?
And they just, they do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. We're at an interesting point right now where, like, in this history, we're obviously at an
Right
interesting
now
point
in
right
history,
now.
we're in the well, this part of the story too, of our human story, this is a very intriguing part. And that, isn't that crazy? Like, how recently that shift was in our thinking. It was all building to this. And then this schism occurred, and the disconnection and the power of reason for its allowing our increased capacity to affect our environments, to affect the world, and to build and amass and advance technology. This is a powerful driving force. It gave us so much power as peoples, as civilizations, and then as empires, and it changed the course of human history. But we certainly did become disconnected from the sacred. And vestiges of it have survived, but it is no longer our existential being mode that most humans inhabit.
But it's not so far.
Totally,
it's not so far away.
It's not so far away either. No, it's immediately accessible and available.
Well,
we have all of these ancients at hand now. And we're trying. We've in the midst of this revolution now today, of interest in the mindfulness, wisdom practices of the past.
Yeah. Oh, what a time to be alive! We have the ability to completely destroy ourselves and the ability to ascend to a higher state on the same plate.
Yeah, and that's exactly when it would occur, right?
Oh yeah. Well, that's the axial movement, the turning, the moving around something.
Right.
Yeah.
We've gotten to the point to where
the turning.
Our technology is so great that if we can indeed level up, or we can destroy ourselves or severely set ourselves and the planet back. Yeah. As at least so far as the next intelligent species being able to make it after us, if we actually eradicated ourselves. The planet will probably be okay enough.
I'm hoping that humanity is going to last so long that we're going to be the fuel that some other advanced civilization is pumping out of the ground to fuel their civilization. I want to last that long.
That would be
I want to be a nice big thick layer in the crust. But
we've given a lot back.
I'm looking for millions of years here.
Helped regenerate a lot of the biomass on the planet.
Well, we can personally as well as collectively, we have the ability to either destroy ourselves or make everything better and transcend ourselves. We're at that
we do.
We're at that point right now.
We really
but
are.
Are we going to be the kid that's stealing just because they know it's wrong?
Yeah, this is the point where this is of maximum importance. Like, we have to earn our way into being a long-term symbiotic species with each other in this planet and get to venture out and explore space.
Well, we can't keep licking at our festering wounds, expecting them to heal. We can't just keep doing that.
Yeah, man, Vervaeke's hitting home a lot lately. And thank you so much to John Vervaeke for this series and for his new wisdom series that's ongoing right now. You guys should check that out as well. If you're looking for some actionable things that you can do right now, actual practices. He goes through all different kinds of contemplative practices. He teaches Tai Chi. Does a lot of stuff in this series, and it's really exciting to see it coming out now.
Yeah.
So it's like basically what happens after awakening from the meaning crisis.
Yeah, now that you're awake, what do you do?
Yeah. After Socrates and Aristotle and Plato.
All right, well, on that note, I'm turning into a pumpkin.
No doubt. Well, love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Actuali Podcast. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
And we'll talk to you soon. Love you guys.